Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Cardboard Herald, my chance to talk with creative gamers and game creators. And joining me today is Dave Beck of Paverson Games. You got a new game coming out on the horizon, man. How you feeling?
Uh, no sleep, tired, anxious, but excited. Very excited. Very happy to be here too.
Well, Distilled is hitting Kickstarter here at the beginning of July 6th, if my notes are to be believed here. And this is Paverson Games' first release. This is your first tabletop game design, but you are not a novice when it comes to game design, period. As I understand it, you're actually like a video game designer as well, or maybe you have some like academic history within video game design. Why don't you give me like the elevator pitch on who you are, Dave?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah. My name's Dave Beck. I'm the founder and owner, all that stuff of Paverson Games, and yes, creator designer of Distilled. My background is actually way back is more studio art, so sculpture and drawing. That paired with my passion and love for just technology, found myself doing lots of 3D modeling and animation. That then paired with my passion for games, found myself all of a sudden being interested in video games and video game design and art and world building. And so before I knew it, I was teaching at a university, teaching game design and then founding a game design program. That's where I am now at the University of Wisconsin-Stout, where I'm a professor of game design. There I have been for the last 10 years. And I've got some background in doing my own indie art games as well as video games for museums. But this, like you said, is my first foray into board game design and publishing.
So 2011 is when we would be in the Wayback Machine to when you started. So at the time, because I am going somewhere as it relates to tabletop games. I'm not just polling for video game information here, but at the time that you started as a video game design professor, was that like a relatively new academic study, or you still had to earn some legitimacy within the academic circles when it came to like game design? You can't teach a class about game design.
Totally. So I was hired, and I amongst a big group of art and design faculty, graphic design, industrial design, painting, sculpture. And I can tell you, and I think I'd be happy to tell it to all 50 of them right now, 75 of them right now. They all looked at me and said, "Oh, this guy's not going to last a year. Give me a break." Like game design, yeah. And the game designers were known for being some of the worst artists as well, because they just love playing video games, and they might not necessarily have that background in art and design. And I can happily say we've completely changed it. Now those game designers are some of our best artists and best designers, because we've really worked to kind of grow the respect and understanding, just like the industry has, for what that kind of type of field is about. So yeah, definitely. I started out and I was kind of the bottom of the barrel for sure.
So how do you feel it ranks up the ludological side, the tabletop game design, as like a legitimate area of academic study compared to video game design? Because video games are so much more prevalent within our culture now, but also they haven't been around nearly as long as tabletop games. And there's also this burgeoning growth of the modern hobby game market. So do you feel like there's an equal amount of respect there? Do you think you could be a board game or a tabletop game professor, or is that something that's going to take some time in order to kind of build up from here?
Yeah, that's a great question. That I think that many video game design programs, so when I say that, it's usually video games, I think they've wrestled with for the last 5 to 10 years. And I think to me, it kind of comes down to somewhat similar to if we compare something like a student that wants to be a product designer or an architect. The first classes they take are usually a very traditional drawing class where they're drawing with charcoal at the still life in front of them. I'd like to liken board games to that same type of concept for video games. Our first class that we have our students take as game designers at Stout, no video games. It's all board game prototyping, working with your hands, coming up with puzzles, coming up with strategy and understanding the mechanics. So I really think board games are essentially kind of that foundation of that game design process. Tracy Fullerton is a very well-known game designer, but also professor out in California. Has released some amazing video games, but also she's written a book, and it's one of the probably the best books in game design out there. And it's the same thing. It's a video game design book, but it basically says, well, I'm not going to bother teaching you about video games here. The important part is to learn how to design board games, because that breaks it down to its root, where it has to be a good gameplay experience, as opposed to a video game where they can, as we know, throw flashes at you and effects and hide some of that sometimes behind all the art and visuals as well. So I think it's very, very important. I think it's a foundation to game design, and I do think that it's growing, as you said, as the industry grows. I think we're going to start to see sub-disciplines come out in certain programs, and we already are in certain cases across the country, where it's more focused on analog design as well.
Well, we're looking at Distilled right now. We're looking at, physical board games, and I'm actually looking at you. It's great for the audio version of this for me to describe what's going on in the background, right? That makes great audio. But, you got in your background, you got your roots, your rising suns. I see some Puerto Rico over there. You got your host of board games. And I'm wondering, at what point did you start getting attracted to physical games? Was it after falling in love with video games and then you kind of made a detour into this physical realm? Or have you always been into board games and tabletop games? Tell me about that kind of trajectory.
Yeah, really interestingly, a big fan of board games as a kid, as many were, but for me, I really enjoyed some of your more basic games, but at the same time, a friend of mine had a closet full of games, and we'd oftentimes play Scotland Yard, and I really liked it. It was something different than I usually would get to play with my family.
It's still good. It's still good.
Yeah, it is still good. I own it, and I still have my copy from a kid. So anyway, I played some, but then I kind of shut that door. Honestly, I didn't play board games at all. And then it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago, my wife, as a gift, got me Dominion.
Okay. Yeah. That'll do it.
And I was like, oh, this is interesting. A board game, really, honey? I mean, thank you, but I have video games. I don't need this. And I had some friends over just to try it out and play, and I couldn't believe it. Like, I was so unbelievably blown away by how amazing that experience was that I was hooked, like line and sinker. And of course, you know how it is. It always is this way. Then you just go down that deep chasm of acquiring all the games.
Yeah, that's inevitably how it happens. And I mean, deck building games, Dominion specifically, I mean, Donald X came up with something that just completely shifted the entire landscape of tabletop games. And even if you'd played things like Magic the Gathering or Pokemon or any of that, to kind of take the meta element, the outside of the game element that feels so cool at constructing things, and put it into the game as a mechanic itself, is the best. So yeah. It's no wonder that game hooked you along with tons of people out there. I mean, it's still a kind of jaw-dropping experience if you haven't played a deck building game to sit down with Dominion. Now, did you immediately go from that to like, I could make a board game? I mean, a lot of people do. Like, even if you're not a game design professor,
it's just some paper and.
Yeah, everyone goes through that experience where they start out playing a game, they play their Catan or their Kingdom Builder or their Dominion or whatever, and they get a couple games under their belt, and they're not really aware of the vast swaths of games that are out there, and they assume, well, there's probably like 10 good games that have been made at this point, so I can make the 11th one. And so you sit down and you start designing things, and it's kind of clunky, and you're like, what am I even doing here? And you realize that people have done what you've done so many times over, except much better, as you immerse yourself in more and more games. Was that you? Was that common experience, your initial instinct too, to sit down and be like, I'm making the best game, the 11th game?
So, no. So interestingly enough, I played it, I got hooked, I started buying more games. I realized this is what I want to do in my free time. friends around a table,
Right.
enjoying an experience. But I have absolutely no interest or even would know where to begin with my own game. So that's kind of where I took that stance for years. Of course, I was teaching this introductory game design class from time to time. But again, same thing. It's more of just working with exercises. And I was focusing on video games that I had 4 years of working on one game myself for quite a long time, a video game. So I had no interest, but it was with Distilled out of nowhere. Again, I'm just going to keep referencing my partner, but my wife kept saying, "Oh, you're going to design a game one of these days, a board game. I know it." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. No interest. No, I want to play them. I don't want to design them because I know if I design one, I'm never going to get to play games again because I'm going to have to play that darn game over and over again."
Right.
So,
Right.
but then out of nowhere, it happened, hit me over the head, and I got the bug again, and I've been doing that nonstop now. So
How long
it's one of
ago
those
was
things where I
that?
just don't see it. Just about 2 years ago, year and a half, 2 years. So I haven't been working on it for that long. But for those that know me, I basically I work and then I get home and I do this straight all day, all night, all weekend. But it's been almost 2 years of working on Distilled.
Burning the midnight oil.
That's
Did you
right.
start with theme or did you start with mechanics?
I started with a dram of scotch.
There you go.
So a little bit of whiskey. No, but I started entirely with theme, 100%. And I think that's partly because of my background as an artist, but also I was a history major in undergrad too. So I'm really focused more on that idea of theme and story.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided to let that kind of drive how the mechanics unfolded from there.
That's a good call. That's a good call. So once you started developing some mechanics, like what was the aha moment for like this is something different? Because at this point, if I'm following my timeline, if I got everything mapped out as explained so far, you had been playing board games for maybe like 7 or so years at this point. And so you'd seen a lot. You have those games on your shelf now. You've seen the innovation, the changes, and everything. And I imagine you, as a professor, as an academic, you don't just want to introduce a reskin of an already existing concept that has been done to death. You want something that's fresh and invigorating and exciting, something that you would see on the table and be like, I want to buy this game. So, like, what was the moment in the development of this game where you felt like this is very different from everything else that's out there, or enough so combined with this theme that I really want to make a go of this being the debut game for us?
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, again, kind of ties back to the professor route, ties back to I wasn't looking for this route, kind of came out of nowhere. I was in 2019. Summer and fall of 2019, I was actually over in Scotland doing research around a sabbatical that I had as a professor, which basically means I was away for a semester doing research instead of teaching. So very lucky and fortunate to be able to have that happen. I was over there and I was actually doing research on historical Scotland, focusing on augmented reality and virtual reality. So again, still games, video games, and that type of technology. It was over there one night. I couldn't sleep. And the idea for the game literally popped in again after maybe a drink or two of scotch. The idea popped into my head that, oh my gosh, I had toured a bunch of distilleries up until that point, and I thought, wait a minute, there's this really interesting part about distillation, which is that the first part of the run that comes off the still and the last part of the run of the liquid is actually toxic. It's you can't drink it; it'll blind you. It's not good. But distillers always reuse it. So they take it and they set it aside and then they run it through again to reuse it for a new batch. And I thought, wait a minute, this could be interesting. Like I could work with some sort of deck mechanic where you blindly take the top, you shuffle things, you blindly take the top card and the bottom card as the head and the tail, the first part of the run, the last part, and you remove those. So you're kind of pushing your luck, but I could try and represent a distillery in the process of distilling and aging, which is kind of romantic, and selling and hiring people. And so that all happened in one night in terms of conceiving of this idea about a game about distillation. It was originally, going back to Dominic, deck builder. And so with all of that, I realized that the combination between this kind of head and tail cut, the top and bottom card, and the theme, like you mentioned, where there's really no other game out there about spirits, about distilling alcohol. There's games about beer and
Yeah,
wine, but
yeah,
about
totally.
liquor, that I thought, you know what, there's something here. I need to keep pushing this harder than just, wouldn't this be cool if? So that's kind of how that happened.
Speaking of games with spirits, I mean, I don't know that I've really talked about this much on the Cardboard Herald, but me personally, I'm a teetotaler. I don't drink, right? Which is, you know, like it's not like any sort of moral objection to alcohol or anything. It's like a personal choice and that kind of stuff. But you know, like, is that a consideration when you make a game about spirits? You know, like viticulture is one of my favorite games, but I wonder if there was any cost benefit analysis to making a game themed around alcohol, of like, oh, some people might be
Totally.
uncomfortable with this
Yep.
as a
Yep.
theme.
Yeah, totally. That was something that I've had to think about very hard, as well as talk about when I'm talking about the game, because um, for anyone that plays the game, they immediately realize, oh, like it's not about. Well, obviously, it's not about drinking. Well, maybe not. Obviously, it's not about drinking at all.
Right, right. It's about the
It's more
craftsmanship
about
that's involved.
alchemy. It's
Yeah.
alchemy. It's science. It's business. It's it's craftsmanship. And very much like viticulture or brew crafters are two alcohol themed games that are worker placement. This is not worker placement. It's heavily card based, but it's the same concept where I have to help people understand that no, it could be about making tea like chai, right?
Hmm.
It could be, but yes, it happens to be that industry, and it is something that I try and be respectful of. I don't want this to be a trigger for people, or for people that not be something that people aren't interested in. Kind of like what you said with viticulture. I want this to be something that, regardless of whether you know or are interested in that theme, you'll
Right.
still find engaging, which I hope to be the case.
Yeah, I think most people, you know, who don't have like maybe a moral objection to alcohol can realize that there is a craftsmanship to this. There's a heritage. There's an entire like cultural identity in many cases that surround the process of
Exactly.
creating as well as consuming alcohol. You know, there are beloved rituals that involve alcohol that are very important from family perspectives and even religious perspectives. So, you know, it kind of crosses the gamut. So I can totally see why someone would be interested in, you know, in our home, you know, my wife drinks. So, you know, she's like, all right, I'll have a glass of wine and play viticulture. And I'm
Yep.
sure
Exactly.
if, you know, we had, this on the the table, you know, she'd be like, Distilled is yet another excuse here.
That's right.
And
That's
that would
right.
be great. So when you're developing this game, when do you know that it's done? Like that's one of the most curious things to me as a consumer, not a designer, as a consumer of games who's interested in the process of creative individuals, is like, how do you not overcook it?
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, such a good question. And I don't think there's unfortunately, I wish there was a thermometer I could stick in that thing and it would, like, the red thing
Yeah,
pops up
yep,
like,
yep.
oh, good. Oh, good. I thought it had more time. This is great. I'm done. But yeah, that's, or a timer. It's not the case. Um, I think what I found was that, I went through, I could talk about this forever, but I went through rigorous play testing, a lot of it, of course, online over the past year and a half. And I could see, as I refined things and accepted some people's feedback and decided not to accept other people's feedback or implement other people's feedback, I could see that window, or that volume of feedback to change certain things or to be critical about certain things, especially when you hear it repeated by multiple people,
Right.
that was starting to disappear, to the point now where, when we play test the game, I work with a developer, a friend of mine, but also a developer over in the UK, Richard, who's been working on the play testing as well with me. We're at that point now where we know, yeah, every so often people have something to nitpick about, but it's not necessarily across the board. The game doesn't break, right? The game feels balanced when people play, and the scores end up, relatively close to each other. So it's some of those flags that pop up, and I think once you see enough of those flags that pop up, or you stop hearing people raise the red flag, that's when you can kind of start to say, okay, it's good. But I'd also say, last thing about that is that it's not done yet, right? So I'm bringing it to Kickstarter, and we're continuing to play test. There's little tweaks here and there we're still continuing to do. So honestly, I don't think it's going to be done until we realize, okay, we need to be happy with where we stand now, and it's time to send that away to the manufacturer. So.
Right, right. You know, I'm trying to think of a quote by another professor, though not of game design, but a game designer, Richard Garfield. He had some sort of meditation on luck in games, and I can't think of the quote right now, and Google is not coming back to me. Board Game Geek is, or maybe actually this is on Board Game Design Lab. We're going over here to Gabe. This is again great podcasting.
Yep, totally.
But I'm not finding the exact quote, but the idea is that he was talking about how when it comes to game design, you want to have an element of luck. There has to be some sort of random element. Otherwise, it is too deterministic. I mean, yes, there are games out there that have no luck whatsoever, but for making it something accessible to even a moderate size audience, you still have to have some sort of chance that the underdog can overcome. You still have to have some sort of chance that if you're falling behind, that the right card for me right now can kind of take me back there, or the wrong card for my opponent can kind of throw a wrench in their plans. Where do you fall when it comes to like how much luck you like in your games, and how did you implement luck or random chance into Distilled?
Yeah. So I think it also, for me with games and luck, it depends on the audience or the party I'm playing with, as well as the setting. So, if I'm sitting down to play something that's an hour or two long, couple hours long, I'm fine with a little bit of luck, but yeah, like you said, I want just a little bit there, so I can also develop a strategy. Where if it's something that's more of a party game or a shorter game, I think there's probably some sort of interesting kind of spectral scale that the longer a game is, the less luck there might be, right? So
Right.
those shorter games have a lot more, which is good because then you can start over and do it again. So with Distilled, so I'm kind of in the middle where I appreciate Quedlinburg. I'm glad it's the length it is, right? And some people have likened Distilled not to Quedlinburg, but it has a tiny push your luck element to it like that. And in Distilled, it's more of a mitigate your luck. And I think that's where I try and find that happy medium, where the game goes through every single round. You are distilling alcohol, and when you do, you're taking cards out of a deck that is essentially your recipe. And if you're shuffling those and you take the cards out that would have fulfilled that whiskey recipe or that gin recipe, you've gone from making those to a spirit like moonshine or vodka. So there's always something you're going to make there. So that's what I've tried to do, is that there's always this backup that if you bust, quote unquote, you're not totally busting. You're just making something else, and it's worth a lot of money as opposed to points. But I've also tried to set things up with different mechanics, like building a tableau, which would be you hiring distillery workers or equipment, as well as other ways you can go about mitigating that luck. So that's kind of where I stand and why I appreciate and wanted to make sure luck was part of the game. I feel it adds to the replayability and kind of coming up with those moments that you remember, like, oh, remember that time when I went to make that tequila and it had, I don't know, when I aged it in the warehouse, I pulled it out and it had rubber tire flavor, or whatever it might be. In this game, I've tried to add some of that to it without punishing the player as much as helping to create those stories and those memories.
We're in the mid-June area, and you have about half a month before this puppy is going to launch on Kickstarter. What are your next steps aside from coming on to podcasts with extremely charming and handsome podcast hosts?
Exactly. Oh man. So right now, a glimpse into my life. I'm connecting with different previewers, content creators who have the game right now, and kind of going back and forth with them, answering questions they might have. I'm working really hard with my artist, Eric Evanson, who did all the art and graphic design for the game. He's also a college professor here at UW Stout in design, general design. And so I'm working with him on developing the Kickstarter page. And I'll tell you, it's so funny. a year and a half ago, I got into this because I was so excited about designing this game. And over the last month or so, it's turned into like, oh, I'm a designer. Oh, guess I forgot that because all I'm doing is writing emails and getting quotes from the factory, and so it's
The
a very
widgets need
different
to be
space.
accounted for, Dave. Think
That's
of the
right.
widgets.
I know all the widgets. So yeah, so that's my life right now. As well as communicating, I do, I have a pretty strong Facebook group community around the game, so that's been great to engage with them. Getting it online for people, so on Tabletopia, working with someone else on that. To make it playable so that people can experience it when the game is live on Kickstarter. So yeah, it's kind of crazy right now. It's almost every day, all day, just kind of grinding away, not on the game's design necessarily, but more so on the publishing side of it.
Throughout the process of developing this game, about how many separate games have you started like design docs for?
Oh, jeez. Um,
It starts with one, but it doesn't end there.
yep. Yeah, no, not at all. Yeah, so well, so in addition to Distilled, I've got about four other games in the back of my head that I've scribbled down notes, but and that I hope to, look at afterwards. But it's so funny the way I work and the way my brain works and um, how I accomplish things kind of as far as tasks and goals is I dive into the deep end on that one thing
Hmm.
and I don't think about anything else. So it's more like I scribbled some stuff down and I'll come back to it later. But I've been like living and breathing, and my friends and my family will tell you as well that I've been living and breathing nothing but Distilled for the last year and a half.
I bet. I bet. Well, I don't want to portray you as like a cocky individual or anything, but like Kickstarter is a very different thing than it has been in the past, and I gotta
Yeah.
imagine that you're going into it with a pretty good amount of confidence because you've developed this game so much more than what maybe a person in your shoes would have done 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. Well, I don't know that Kickstarter was truly a thing 10 years ago, but there were early games on Kickstarter and they weren't in the state in which Distilled is right now. And there are so many resources available. I mean, I mentioned Board Game Design Lab is a fantastic
Yeah.
resource. Occasionally, we say something smart on this channel. It's a rarity, but it is known to happen from time to time. And also there are tons of game design communities. There's Unpub and all that kind of stuff. So there is a risk. There is a potential darkest timeline in which Distilled doesn't fund. But
Mhm.
I mean, this just smacks of a game that's going to go up. It's going to fund. It's going to be no problem. People are going to love it. And from your point of view, from where you're sitting, is it a matter of like you are confident that it's going to fund, no worries there, but it's a matter of like how much is it going to fund and stretch goals? Or are you genuinely in a place where you're like, I hope this hits our dollar mark of getting
Mhm. Mhm.
funded at all?
Yeah, yeah. So that's something that definitely keeps me up at night. um, I I think based on so I had a choice about a year ago. I had talked with some friends who had been through Kickstarter process before, well, not 10 years ago, like you said, but close, 8, 7 years ago. And I, whenever I talk to them about it, I refer to it as the Wild West because it was a very
Yeah.
different time,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
You could throw in like some scratches, some scribbles up, like, "Hey, give me $10,000." Like, "Oh, sure, take
Yeah.
it." So, so that's I had a choice. I feel like about a year ago to say, okay, I could launch this thing soon. So I could launch it like at the time I said I could launch it in the fall of 2020, um, in the pandemic, but I could do this. Uh, and I could go for it. And I thought, or I could wait. I could wait an entire year, build up to this. And I realized, to me at least, if I had launched a year ago, or not a year ago, but launched last fall, I would hopefully have been able to make my funding goal, which is around $18,000. I would like to have hoped, but the game was in a very different space then, very different everything about it. And it would have been closer to that Wild West idea of like, I've been working on this for just about a year. What do you think? But I decided not to, and I decided to go all in. on the other approach where I'm going to basically take the next year to build up to it. I'm going to listen to your podcast. I'm going to listen to Gabe's podcast. I'm going to participate in communities. I'm going to read books, right? I'm going to read Jamie's blog, like everything, right? And some of the stuff I've been doing already, but like really intently doing it. And I'm going to invest some money in this. I'm going to bring a team on, not just me. I'm going to do this right and kind of learn from mistakes of others have made, learn from successes. So a long answer to that is that I mean, like you said, I don't want to paint myself as cocky. I'm hopeful, knock on wood, that we are going to fund. And I'm confident, I should say, that we are going to fund over the course of the nearly 30-day campaign. But I'm hopeful that we'll go beyond that, because I'm really excited about some of the things that we're going to be able to do if we can get the community engaged and around this idea. So time will tell. Maybe I'll be eating my words. I'm not sure, but I really hope that we'll be in a happy place come early mid-July.
Well, I'm confident that you're going to be in a happy place. So I want to know that 30 days into that Kickstarter, or however long it's going to take, when you have finished that Kickstarter, you've just reached the culmination of 2 years of burning the midnight oil. And yes, there is more work to be done at that point. But what are you going to do to celebrate? What are you going to do as like taking one day off to set Distilled aside and say, yes, it is a reality, and now I can take some time for me?
Totally. Well, I'm so excited. I'm going to be we always go to Michigan and visit some family up there. So we'll do that for sure in August. But the thing I'm probably going to do, and shows you how behind I am on catching up, is I've had The Last of Us 2 video game in plastic wrap since the day it was released.
I hope you've avoided spoilers. I hope you've avoided spoilers.
Yeah, no spoilers. So I'm actually, it's funny, I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm really looking forward to just becoming obsessed with board games again, where I get to play them, because I don't get a chance to do that much anymore. So I think those are the things I'm going to be doing. And of course, spend time with family. I'd get in trouble if I didn't say that. Yeah, so that's the thing that's been laughing at me this whole time, is this game that I've been excited to play for going on, I want to say like 2 years. I don't know how long it's been there, but so I'm looking forward to that.
All right. Well, like I said, I'm confident that it's going to come out great. Dave Beck, thank you so much for coming on to the show. For you in the audience, in podcast land, in YouTube land, check out the video or podcast description for all the links to Distilled that are going to be up. Hopefully I'll get like the Kickstarter landing page, and certainly by the time that the Kickstarter goes up, I'll have the live links in there. That's coming July 6th. Once again, Dave, thanks for coming on. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Jack, so much. This has been great.